Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ThreeCameramen
Okay.
podcast. Right, today we're doing a cheeky little bit of
Too much now.
What did think I was? Right, okay, we didn't think I was a podcast.
we did a cheeky bit of City of God this week. So as a Brazilian film, won 4 Oscars or BAFTAs, if I'm not mistaken. Quite successful.
It was nominated for 4 Oscars, so it didn't win.
Nominated. Oh, yes, my bad. I don't think it won any because it was competing with Lord of the Rings. That would probably be the main reason. But alas, today we're doing City of God. It was released in 2002, directed by Fernando Meirelles and co-directed by Katia Lund. So he's obviously quite. You got Brazilian directors on the project, made with mostly unprofessional actors, surprisingly, taken from just other people that were willing to do it from around City of God, and they auditioned and then they got the role. The person that plays Rocket is, however, a professional actor. So, just FYI.
Well, most people are unprofessional actors.
Yeah, I did say that. We are for the third week in a row going to be doing a bit more analysis. What was your guys' first opinion when watching the film? Just for a little round review, Owen.
So when I first watched it, I remember being quite taken aback by how chaotic the entire thing was. And for our exam, we have to compare this with Pan's Labyrinth, which we did a couple of weeks back. And I do prefer that film. After studying the film more, I've realised just how intelligent and genuinely, intelligent it is. Like it's incorporating so many elements at once that are working so well, in sync with one another. And like the more I study it, the more I find out about it. Like, the more I appreciate the smaller details in the cinematography or the mise en scène or the editing. I think the editing is what really carries this film in terms of the editing. Definitely. Is so unconventional and non-linear and non-traditional that it really matches the chaotic and disturbing acts of violence happening on screen. And we'll also get more into that later. But yeah, I do like this film a lot.
Finley?
It's alright.
Great. So what we wanted to touch on first was kind of, I suppose you mentioned the editing, so we could mention a bit about kind of the narrative and that kind of cyclical structure it had. I don't know if either of you guys had.
So cyclical narrative, as you were saying, the idea that is mostly prevalent throughout the film is the idea you cannot leave the City of God. If you exude violence, you will be met with violence. If you are passive to the violence, you will still be met with violence. That's while it is very ever present in the editing, it's most prominent in the characters. Specifically, I'll put an example. Benny, he wasn't violent. He was one of the good people in a way, but he still did he still dealt with drugs. He still cooperated in these crimes. Then he was met with death as a result of something.
He was.
Same
Who's
with
that guy again?
Benny.
Lil Z's best friend. And on Little Z, same thing with him. He was a psychopath from a very young age, and hence was met. It's interesting. His first sort of murder was adults and people above him, and then he was later murdered by people below him.
And in that kind of in the montage editing where he's kind of shooting, or as he's growing up, and in the story of Little Z, you have a very low angle shot of him, so showing that he's definitely above all these people that he's shooting, and he's definitely got a sense of status in
also places the spectator as the victim of all his killings, as we are we are forced to see of his actions, and this is ever present. And
on top of the cyclical structure of never being able to leave, you also have just the continuation of the crime-ridden City of God. So you have, at the end of the film, you have these runts, they're called, and they walk kind of away from the camera, and they're all talking about, we're going to shoot out this gang, and they kind of become the new leaders in the city.
Another notable bit about that thing you were saying, Daniel, was obviously that's one of the few moments in the film where the camera doesn't move. and it's sort of like the camera's just giving up and trying to help the city of God and like spectate it, and it's just sat there and watches them as they walk away, like distant from the camera, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller, and it sort of emphasizes just how contained the story was and how this is only a slice of the naturalism that is the entire city of God. It's just a portion of what's happening everywhere in the city of God, which I think was really, really effective ending. If very abrupt, I wasn't expecting to end there at all. I was quite surprised the first time I watched that. But Finley, anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say the opening scene's quite important in the way showing, first of all, showing like establishing the setting of the film, because obviously you get a view of this chicken running through the slums and the favela of Brazil, and you get an idea of how cramped and how everyone knows each other, how how the gangs form, and how violence commences between the police and the gang members.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite good because they do that through editing as well, especially when they're running through the tight favelas. I thought that was good.
Then I suppose you got the idea of kind of constantly being trapped in the city,
Yeah.
or kind of trapped, because there's a line that Rocket says, isn't it, where he says, "If you run, they catch you. If you say, they catch you."
Yeah.
So it's kind of along with not being able to escape.
That's also sort of emphasized by again, like you said, the characters. I think I can think of one character who genuinely managed to escape the city of God, and that's one in the Tender Trio. I can't remember his name, but the middle one, we have the C. Whoever he is, he met God after the battle, after the motel.
Like Clipper.
That's it, Clipper. He met God apparently, and then escaped the city of God from that. A very ironic the city of God idea and how God's left the city of God. But then, like we see people come very close to escaping, which is Shaggy with his girlfriend in the car, Benny, Rocket's brother, I can't remember the name of. Those three come so close to escaping, but then obviously don't.
Interesting enough, the guy that escaped Clipper, he's kind of never seen again from the film at all. And obviously this story is told through the perspective of Rocket, who is constantly in the city of God, and that's kind of the only life he knows. So the idea that we never ever have reference to Clipper again through the rest of the film kind of shows how a lot of it is focused on kind of the negative aspects of the city, and Rocket kind of he ignores that kind of symbol of hope or the way to escape, because he knows that ultimately he will be trapped for most of...
Rocket does escape the idea of the city of God. He
by the end he does.
He has passion, and he managed to follow his passion and get a decent job as a photographer, which ironically, this idea of photography is very prevalent in the cinematography of the film. What I noticed is a lot of the shots are very overexposed or underexposed, like as sort of amateur photographer would have. And also the editing is like, well, in the opening sequence, when we see the title card City of God, the camera shot is a gunshot, compare it to a weapon, and we see the sort of gunshot effect in many transitions between certain scenes. I'd say
particularly in
automated.
I'd say particularly in kind of Benny's leaving scene, when they have the strobe light sequence. That sort of effect creates very it's not one fluid movement from then. It's very kind of striking images one after another that you can still track along. And obviously while it also builds tension, it definitely creates that effect of just photographs being taken of this key event, and obviously the aftermath of that.
That scene is like really hard to watch, not because of like the subject, but it's just genuinely really hard to keep track of what's going on. And that definitely adds to this
very... It's also quite a haunting scene.
Yeah, obviously, but it's not the most haunting. That would obviously be the run scene where they like shoot the kid.
They did say in the behind the scenes you have to be quite weak to not watch that scene. So.
Wait, you have to be weak not to watch that scene. Okay, yeah.
He just called you weak, Owen.
No. I said not for the subject matter, because of the strobe lights.
And you too, Dan. You said you struggled watching it, didn't you?
Run bit, yeah. Well, yeah, it's hard to watch, isn't it?
Wait, Finley,
It's unnatural, isn't it? If
Finley,
you enjoy watching that, there's something
Finley,
wrong with
Finley,
it.
Finley. Are you saying that the runt bit is make sure we can't watch that bit?
The rump bit.
Yeah, where they shoot
Where you get
a
shot in the
kid
foot.
and a kid dies.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the strobe light bit.
No.
We were, but it's in something different now.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's
But yeah, again, but back to the Benny bit, that adds to this whole reckless style. This idea of montage editing is very prevalent, very flashy. And I think the idea of photographs is also present, like with the scene you were talking about earlier, Daniel, which is sort of the evolution of Little Z. As he's like pointing down the camera, it's like different shots of like different points in his life as he evolves and comes into his final form, as it were.
And similarly, at the end of that montage, you have Benny stood next to Lil Z and he shoots like 3 shots up in the air.
Yeah.
After, he's still shooting at whoever's on the ground. But then when Benny dies and Lil Z is standing over his body, he also shoots shots up in the air, which is kind of a mirrored image.
This very much coincides with the documentary aesthetic the film has going for it. We see a lot of handheld cameras. The shots are very natural. The acting's very natural. Well, apparently, I didn't realize this. A lot of the scenes were very much improvised, and that's so effective because obviously all these non-actors grew up in the favelas, so they have a first-hand experience of what's happening on the screen.
About 70% of dialogue was improvised as well.
I had noticed. Apparently, I couldn't quite believe when I saw this. The runt scene we're talking about was actually improvised. I don't get how that works. How do you like?
I don't think it was improvised, but I don't think the other children were told what would happen. It wasn't.
They were genuinely scared.
Surely that's traumatizing.
No, but they wanted. It's like Kubrick with The Shining. He wanted. Like they must have wanted a genuine reaction from the violence that they were displaying. Well, which obviously worked quite effectively.
But this one I think is true because I read an article that said the acting trainee who like trained all the kids to act trained the kids specifically for that scene.
Yes, yes. The one that was getting shot and the one that was also like basically died. They knew about it. The rest of the kids who were like,
I see.
Who were with them, I don't think they knew it. So that I think that's what they meant by the term improvised. But
no, 100%. On that scene as well. I think I rewatched it recently because I have to, and the cinematography is really effective in really like foreboding who's going to die in this situation. You see a lot of like
who's going to
die in the situation. You see Steak and Fries like walking out of shot when the Lil Z's like really like saying, "Oh,
Steak and Fries."
Steak and Fries, yeah, the guy who shoots the kid. That's his name.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah, it's Steak and Fries. When Lil Z is trying to decide to shoot his hand or foot, Steak and Fries walks out of frame because he at this point he realizes that the crime life is not as always like cracked up as meant to be. He's like he attempts to get out of the shot by going out of frame and get out of the picture. But then the criminal, that is Lil Z, pulls him back into focus. And then you have the guns very much highlighted by the very, very small ray of sunlight that comes through the cracks in the wall, because it's very much hidden, this spot of the favela. Hence, like, this is very like, it also just suggests that this is a regular occurrence because it happens like quite distant from the main favelas everywhere. The gun's very much highlighted, and when Steak and Fries is deciding who to kill, you see the boy who dies eventually in just like the corner of the frame over his shoulder, and it's just like the hopelessness that like exudes from that is just haunting. And because like it's all like he's accepting his fate, which is a horrible thing for a child to experience.
It's quite an interesting point you made about kind of the structure of the favela, because obviously it's a very compacted sort of environment for them to be in. So you have the very narrow pathways, and this is going back to the opening sequence, Finley, where you have them chasing this chicken to all these narrow pathways and just like torn down buildings and stuff. And obviously favelas were built as a kind of as a temporary housing for returning soldiers, but then this basically turned permanent for a lot of people in Rio. And it's not really what you'd initially think when you think of Rio. You'd think of parties and this whole extravagant lifestyle and Christ the Redeemer, which is obviously significantly not present in the entire film. So it definitely doesn't buy into those sort of stereotypes of this partying life of Rio. and goes for more the gritty realism from the favelas, where like more than 1 million people are still living to this day. So
also a very ironic take on the idea of a city of God when God does not exist in that city.
Yeah,
Christ is never there to, like, you know, watch over these hopeless individuals. And it's
they literally couldn't film it in the city of God because it was too dangerous. They had to film it in like a neighboring favela, which is pretty worrying.
I actually watched a documentary recently on the favelas of the City of God, and it's interesting how now it's obviously not accepted because there's still loads of gang wars between the police and the inhabitants.
Oh, yeah.
But the gangs are now businesses. Like it's so natural how they talk about their business. Like they're holding like army grade machinery, and then saying, oh yeah, I just get like this a week. Like we have accountants doing this, like with cocaine, and all this stuff. It's amazing how natural it is over there. And that makes it more
how
tragic
natural cocaine is.
How natural the drug, like gangs and
right, yeah.
And speaking of well, this is the smooth transition, but binary opposition is much more prevalent than I initially thought when I first watched this film. I didn't realize sort of, obviously we have poverty versus the rich, and that's I believe that's most significant in the motel sequence. I don't know if you guys picked up on that, like the idea that even though the motel's not exactly like the pinnacle of society, these rich, you know, white people enjoying themselves in this luxury motel only to be shot by the poor. And we see how Lil Z mentions in pre-conversations, like you know, charging the rich for way more on all that stuff.
I'd say even when Rocky goes to kind of the photography office, it's very clear that there's a big class divide between a lot of people in these slums.
I also in that motel sequence, I didn't realize how meticulous the cinematography was again. I keep mentioning cinematography. With Lil Dice's first kill, the camera's very static for once. There's no like flashy, you know, Dutch angles. He makes his first kill to people who are out of focus. They are insignificant to him, and like they're like these faceless individuals who are like one of many to come. And then he literally walks into darkness, and he laughs, and he laughs.
Also very.
But but then he shoots.
There's a sinister.
Then he shoots over the counter, and the way it's framed is look at it's a gun range, like practice for him. Like the targets aren't going to move; they're tied up. So he enjoys like getting them like with pinpoint accuracy. And then obviously the cage mirrored in half the frame sort of symbolizes they can't escape this. This is like fate for them.
And interestingly about that, when they show the tender trio escaping from the motel, then it's used with very, very quick cuts. So this is in the story of Lil Z section. That they kind of give you a reminder, oh, like the tender trio got away or whatever. And they use very, very quick cuts. And then it cuts to Lil Dice like walking into the motel and doing his killings, but it's also very slow. And it just kind of shows the very slow and calculated kind of method that Lil Dice has. Like he has thought behind it, and yet he still commits these horrific acts. So I think that kind of juxtaposition of the very quick cuts to very kind of slow stationary shots, it's quite prevalent.
Yeah, no, so Finley, anything else you want to add to that about binary opposition?
Nothing much, no.
Okay. I mentioned earlier about documentary aesthetics, which is the most prevalent idea throughout the film. Obviously, we last week we studied Amy, so we're quite well versed with documentary ideas. Yeah. And did anyone want to add anything else about sort of how it plays into this documentary aesthetic?
I'd definitely say just the shaky camera in general, just kind of that handheld movement is obviously very reminiscent of the documentary style. And I'd also say just a kind of context behind it of getting unprofessional actors to do this and not kind of going out their way to get other people to portray them and having it based on a true story are definitely all factors of a documentary that this film obviously incorporated.
Along with documentary aesthetics, it also adopts similar styles of Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino. Martin Scorsese is the most. There was a quote on one of the posters that said, "If Amores Perros is Mexico's Pulp Fiction, then this is the thing. City of God is Goodfellas, is Brazil, Thai, whatever they said." obviously we have chapter titles both in Mark Scorsese's films and Quentin Tarantino's films. Crash zooms, first person narrators, especially in Goodfellas. We have experimental camera work with Mark Scorsese. Yeah. But where it differs is with Quentin Tarantino, he uses violence for either shock value or for comedic effect. Whereas City glorified nothing funny about violence, and they depict it in the most gruesome way possible, which is very harrowing.
And that kind of helps the message they get across. I mean, obviously, documentaries are designed to give a message to the audience usually, or portray something particular. And although City of God isn't a documentary, it has that style, and basically further emphasizing that like this is not what should be happening, but it is, and it will keep going until something's done about it.
It doesn't try to say like, oh, look how we could have prevented this. It says like, look how we can improve from this. I mentioned documentary aesthetics. I mentioned auteur aesthetics. Colors are very prevalent in this film, much like with Pan's Labyrinth. Blue, obviously representing the gritty, realistic, and modern look at City of God, and orange having this nostalgic golden era aesthetic of the 60s.
I'd definitely say that the oranges are definitely, as you say, kind of the gritty realism. Or kind of that's at the beginning. It's more using bright oranges to kind of almost glorify the violence, even though it's got a very kind of anti-violent message. In the beginning, it kind of glorifies that lifestyle, and later on, as we get down the line and we have Little Z's progression, and then the colors slowly get darker and grayer, and you have more of these basically just dark grays, especially in the apartment scene. I'd say is definitely a key scene where that it visibly gets darker as time goes on, showing the kind of the descent into this completely crime-ridden city.
It's interesting how, like I said, like how glorified and idealized the 60s are, considering like it was still a lot of crime then. There was police inequality, police inequality. There's a lot of petty crimes, but the difference with the petty crimes is they were doing it for the sake of the village. They were stealing gas off tanks. They were doing it to benefit. Yeah,
and then there's other people stealing the gas off the tanks. Whereas when Lil C's progressed, he's threatening to kill someone because they bump his elbow. So
it also makes the ending even more morbid, because like we see the progression of 60s doing it for the community, 70s have selfishness, but it still somewhat benefits the community, still makes it more profitable. The runts, God knows what their motivation is going to be. They just do it for the sake of murdering. They talk about having a blacklist of people who have
who's the runs?
The children.
The children at the end. Yeah. The idea of crowded favelas, like we said, the litter. If you compare that to how it looked in the 60s, if you remember, it was very open, wasn't it? All the buildings were the same level, very like similar in size. There was barely any litter. It was a bit dusty. But apart from that, there was no debris. There was debris, but like a couple bits of debris. There was no like really cramped spaces. Whereas in the 70s and 80s, from the use of high angle shots in the opening, like you said with the chicken, we can see just how like narrow and maze like these streets are, and these and how poor of a living quality is there.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something, Daniel, so I stopped.
I do have another point for this. This film is shot a little bit differently to any normal films. It's shown 16mm as opposed to the kind of normal 35mm.
Not very cinematic, is it?
No, but it's more documentary like, and that's obviously a very intentional decision on the filmmaker's part. It kind of narrows the screen, I guess, makes it more of a kind of shallow focus. Yeah, either way, but it definitely gives the film more shallow focus, more focused kind of narrative. Don't you got anything to say about that?
It restricts the frame a lot, making it like claustrophobic feel the film has, especially in the modern day favelas. And also it has this really grainy, dingy aesthetic to it through the 60mm, like you said. And basically like obviously reflects all the themes of poverty, hopelessness, crime. You get the gist. I would also say that power is the theme of power is represented in a multitude of different ways. We see power like as a sort of, it's not identified as a singular idea. You have guns used as a sort of like authority. You have Lil Z, who just assumes authority by just being Lil Z, the psychopathic killer, and like the reputation precedes him. Drugs sort of viewed as a business, and that you have money, hence you have power. Drug lords, you're owner of that power, therefore you exude even more power, and just like authority in general, and the clash of power between police and Lil Z.
And you have that power shift change obviously quite often throughout the film. So you have kind of the power shifting between kind of the Tender Trio to then Lil Dice, then Lil Z, and then just ultimately at the end it goes towards the run to name overpower Lil Z, which he's ultimately destroyed by the violence that he himself encouraged, which is quite interesting.
Like,
and also ties into the.
It's like his children killed him.
Almost if his children killed him. Another thing I want to say is about kind of gender roles in the film.
Yes.
So the representation of women is not very positive through the thing. So you have what's her name? Benny's girlfriend.
Angelica.
Yes. Angelica is kind of portrayed as she's more objectified rather than seen as an individual character through the film. It obviously doesn't pass the Bechdel test. That's where you have two named female characters who talk to each other in the film about something that's not a man. And that's failed because I don't even think there's two named woman characters. So it's for a quite simple test, it fails quite harshly.
They are regularly like objectified and just used for sex.
You'll see there's a line, I think, when they're on the beach and they're talking about Angelica, but the only thing they say is, "I want to lose my virginity to her," and they're only referencing her in terms of her ability or just what
they are if they use
she can do for them.
Yeah, as sex symbols or as like plot points to move the story forward. But in a way, it does reflect the City of God, and it's probably very prominent throughout the City of God from what we've seen, and that's how Meirelles wants us to think about it.
But in Benny's farewell scene, you have it's the first time you ever see Lil Z's kind of vulnerability physically on screen. So even though he's seen as a very violent character throughout the whole film, even when he just tries to talk to like one female, he immediately breaks down, or he immediately starts kind of thinking about the worst possibilities, and it's got quite kind of sociopathic hints. I don't know, so sociopathic.
It also proves
tendencies.
it also proves very like a very binary opposite to Benny, obviously, like you just said.
Yes.
Benny is very smooth talk. He's like, isn't he referred to like the coolest hood, whatever. Like
even though he grew up in the same lifestyle, he took a different turn and joined the hippies.
He has this sort of cool vibe to him, and like aura almost. That is sort of makes him more approachable than Lil Z. I mean,
I got a question for you. Do you think Lil Z showing his vulnerability in Benny's farewell scene? Do you ever feel sympathy for him during that scene when he loses Benny eventually?
There is that one shot of him after trying his best to have pick up a girl from ask her to a dance, where he's positioned in like the lower half of the frame and barely even that, below like a quarter of the frame, as everything moves around him. And in that moment, I do feel a bit of sympathy towards him. It's like he is so alone in this world, and he will never ever get anywhere without his gun and the power he holds. And it's very sad thought, but then he deserves it because he's a psychopath. So it's very.
What about when Benny dies and he's very distraught? Do you know?
I do. I don't actually. I feel sympathy for Benny and Angelica, not him, because he caused it. So it's because the reason why Blackie shot him, he was meant to shoot Lil Z, because in that scene beforehand, Benny shows Blackie sympathy by not allowing Lil Z to kill him. So it's as a result of Lil Z's violent tendencies, Benny dies. So why would I feel sympathy for someone who caused it?
Yeah. I think those are pretty amazing scene and probably one of the best scenes in the film. I'd say probably my favorite. Not well.
I would
It is
say
my favorite scene in terms of a filmmaking perspective.
Yeah. I would agree. That and the opening sequence I really like.
Yeah.
Especially like that 360-degree camera shot of Rocket.
Oh, the arc shot.
Yeah. As like he ticks back time as if he's the clock of his own. Linking to Vidal's watch in Pan's Labyrinth and how that affects the story.
That does it for this week's podcast. Any final ratings from you guys with Finley?
I'll give it around around a 7, something like that.
7?
That's
Decent.
Owen?
It wasn't 8, but it's sort of gone up to a 9 out of 10 now.
Okay. That's good. I'd give it an 8 as well. So, you know.
Nice. That's good.
Okay.
Pretty decent. But yeah, that does it. Subscribe to our channel. Watch our other videos.
See you next week.
Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Yes.
If you are listening.
Have a nice day.